Welcome back to a new episode of Oh No, My Car's Not Working, and today we have a BMW M3. So this has been sent to me by a customer. He has a few nice cars. I was looking at his Alpina ECU last week. But this week's problem and today's issue, we have his BMW M3 3.2, known in the UK as an Evo. That's the S50 with the double Vanos. So it has failed to start. One of the things he was going to look at was getting rid of the immobilizer and also checking over the ECU. So the first thing to do is power it up, check for codes and see what it says. So this is the MSS50. You can see the part number there, 5WK9025. There is also an MSS 50.1 and you'll see that as 5WK9026. That's the one you'd find on SMGs. This one, this is the manual. I'm guessing they missed out a couple of chips for SMG communication on these ones as it's not needed. But it's one of the common ones you'll come across. And they do have quite a few common faults on them. Injector drivers, you've seen me do some of those before. We've seen one where the processor went faulty. So we're going to have a look now with INPA, and we'll have a look now and see what's turning up. So we want to go for MSS 50 for S50. We are in, read our faults and see what we've got. And there we go. Right, that is going to be our issue. So we have an internal fault, and that is driver diagnose. So what are those we have? That is a general voltage one. Maybe not too important. So the internal driver diagnose, error frequency here is how many times it's been seen. That has been seen then 15 times. Let me just stop that flicker. Doesn't give us much more about that. We do have some stuff there, SPI fault code, IPK fault code. Now, SPI is a communication protocol. So maybe that means that it's not anything that's talking on SPI that's a problem. Maybe on IPK. Oh, I can't think of IPK or something. There was IC squared was another one, but I'm not too sure of that. We have then like our time, so it's been seen for 0.2 of an hour. A longer code there, but not really giving much else. And let's see our other ones. That one there, I think, is just going to be voltage. That's been seen the same time. Tank ventilation valve, oil level sensor, EWS. Throttle potentiometer, that one has been there for quite some time, 25 times. Maybe there's something up with that. Apparently we're doing 40 RPM, so it was cranking over at the time. It was fairly cold. That's been only there for 0.1 of an hour. They're doing decimal hours in this. But we certainly have our internal driver diagnosis been around for longer than that. Climate compressor, not really too worried about that. Relay fuel pump, relay electric fan. In fact, those ones now, most likely, maybe the minimum time, see that there with our -48, that's going to be right now. So I guess that fault comes up always by default as 0.1 hour. So our other one that was up here, 0.1, throttle potentiometer, no, it was seen 25 times. So there's a few things to look into. So we're going to open this up and have a check inside. And I'll first look inside, and there we go. So nothing really stands out, which is fairly common. You don't often see anything burnt, but I'm going to have a bit of a closer look around that and see what's going on. Let's have a look on our other side. And same sort of thing, nothing particularly standing out, but I will have a closer look now and scan over the entire board. So I've had a look over him now, checked these diodes and everything seems normal. I do see one resistor in here. He has been hand soldered back on, so some little bit of a repair was done there before, likely in production. I do see all of these wires, which are the holes that run through the board, so all of these little things, they're all green, which isn't something I'm that familiar with. I'm sure they would normally have been just a silver color. So I don't know if that means, I don't think it is that somebody has gone over them and they've tested all of them, because I'd expected maybe to see the odd one that's been missed everywhere, but all seem green, and that doesn't seem too familiar to me. That certainly stands out. And on the other side, we do have some interesting marking on some chips as well. So I don't think it's going to be just as simple as one of these ignition coil drivers. These are the ones that hide under the back there. As when they go, the ECU doesn't detect it, as it generally goes through an intermediate chip. And this is something interesting. So these here are our intermediate chips, and we do have X BMW Ignit, which is obviously trying to say it's ignition driver. So this processor, I think this side is probably the one that's in charge of sparking, will be telling these driver chips to go and switch on these big MOSFETs, and these are the ones that activate the coils. So it can't detect if one of these coils is gone. All you tend to do is you see a fault code about a misfire on a particular cylinder, but I wonder if it might be one of these guys that has a problem, because it's something that the processor has picked up. So I'm going to check these anyway. I'm going to go in, I'm on diode test, and if we just confirm that, we go to middle leg and continuous onto that back tab, so that's normal. So we're going to check between these two, 1.23, 1.24, oops, 1.24, 1.23, 1.24, 1.23, so that's fine. I'll flick these round the other way, try and get in. 1.24, 1.25, 1.25, 1.25, 1.25, 1.25, so they're all acting kind of fine. Now if I go middle leg, I have a short to that one, nothing. Middle leg, nothing on either. Let me just check that one again. Oh, I might have been touching that against something else. So nothing, 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 nothing. This is what we'd expect anyway. It should be isolated between that back tab, which goes off to our coil, and the other ones inside, so they're all okay. Switch the leads around again, right on the middle, and we're going to go to that leg, nothing, that leg, nothing, 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 no, 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 no. So that all seems kind of normal. None of these are standing out as anything unusual. I could have sworn in some cases we'd have them where we'd see one diode drop, we'd see like 0.7, and the 0.2 is like 2 diode drops in series, but none of these look burnt or anything like that. I see little white marks on them as well, so I think this has gone through a bit of post-manufacturing testing. But yeah, none of these are obviously burnt, none of them stand out on any of the tests, so I think these are okay. Plus, as I say, when these go, you don't get a fault code to do with a chip has gone. All it says is we've got a misfire and we don't know why. So carrying on with our tour around the ECU, I've taken off the remaining clips. As you can see, these other big power drivers around the outside. So these two I checked into them, and these are the Vanos. So this will be, I don't know which one is intake and exhaust, but it's going to be sort of forward and backwards on one, forwards and backwards on the other. This one is a voltage regulator. I'm fairly certain that's going to be fine because everything else is powering up and doing what it should do. These two do the injectors, and I did have one of these before with an issue you'll see in a previous video of mine. This one I think was 4, 5 and 6 and secondary air pump. This one might be 1, 2 and 3, and there's a spare output on that one to do something else. And this again, we've got another 4 output power driver which is going to do some other bits and pieces, so we'll look into what that one does as well. Other bits of note, so these are the drivers for the spark, so we are going to be checking into those ones. And we do have plenty of other things. So these two here, I don't know what those are as yet. These two, I don't know what those are as yet. That's LMOS. LMOS often tends to do a lot more with data. So we have these two chips here for EWS and Diagnostics, and a few other bits and pieces. There's another LMOS chip. These two guys. So that's a hip. These ones are hip. So I'm going to check and see what they are. I don't know if they're power drivers or what they are. And then obviously there's something else just there as well. Can't quite read the writing on it, as the etching isn't as, or the printing isn't as good on some of the other stuff. So looks like I'm going to be diving into some data sheets next to see what some of these other chips are. So after a Google, I have got a little bit more information. So these two here are knock sensor amplifiers or filters, generally knock sensor chips. There's going to be processing in there for knock sensors. We're going to have, this one is the lambda sensor controller. So that one is going to take all of our lambda sensor signals. They're going to amplify that and send it out as data, I guess, into the processor. And these two that are sitting over there, these are also quad power whatever. I can't remember the name of it. I keep trying to think power inverters, but that was Star Wars, where they come up with Luke had to go to Tosche Station for some power inverters. These are quad inverting power drivers, I think. So possibilities of stuff then could be some of these driver chips, as these end up being some sort of driver. These two ones, these here we're going to rule out as their signals in, and then there was the couple of ones just over here which were the drivers for our ignition. So we've got a few things to check out there, and I don't know whether I have to go for the shotgun approach on this and start swapping them. But first off, I'm going to poke around with a multimeter and see if I get anything that stands out on some of these. Hold on, lads, I've had an idea. So one of the things I've decided to check before I go much further is repeatability of these. So if I clear those codes, does our internal driver one come back? And he hasn't at the moment, so nothing there. Let me try a power cycle. This is the kind of ECU that has a soft turn off, so hit the switch and we just wait for a while. We can see it's still drawing half an amp. That's half an amp split between my lead, the input lead hiding over there, and our ECU, and there we go. It now dropped down to 0.2, which is just the lead by itself. So there's a soft turn off, which means it takes a while for it to shut down. But now he has shut down. Boot him back up again, and let's go back and check and see what we have now. Oh dear, that is annoying, which means that that fault takes a while for it to appear. So not a celebratory coffee this time around. This is a sit and think coffee. I want to try and come up with some more ideas. So I cleared the codes. The code wouldn't come back. I've gone through with INPA and I've done a lot of different activations on as many things as I could find, as I've got a feeling that whatever's happening, whatever driver that it has an issue with, it's not activating at the moment and it's not detecting anything. So I've tried to go through on a few bits and pieces to see if I could get anything to turn up. And we have, if we have a look there we are again, 151 internal driver diagnose, and we have those same thing there with our SPI fault code 0, IPK fault code 2, and that there could be something of interest. But here's the interesting bit. That's the ECU we're working on. This is the one where we have our 151 driver code. This was one we had an internal fault in the processor. It was done in a video a few months back, and the chip missing at the back was one of the injector drivers that does some of the cylinders. And it turns out that out of the processor there is a short between two of the activation lines. One of the activation lines that goes off to an injector, and one of the activation lines that went off to the secondary air pump. So whenever it tried to activate an injector, it would also pass a bit of current through to the secondary air pump, and likewise vice versa. When it tried and do the secondary air pump, it would do something into the injector. So we've got something there a little bit interesting, because if those fault codes are actually useful, this IPK fault code 2, that might be narrowing it down to that particular chip. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper now on a blind test and see if we can replicate any of this. In fact, first off, there is another test I should do, which will be, can I clear these codes? So this one, we have tank ventilation valve, we have coil 1, 4, 5, 6. Those ones I'm not that worried about. There's our internal driver diagnose, lambda sensor, lambda regulation. Those kind of stuff I'm not that concerned about. But I'll hit clear. Oh, that hasn't worked because I haven't switched it on. Let's put the power back on. Let's go for a read. Clear. Read again. We do have internal driver diagnose, so at least on this one it is coming up fairly quick. So as a final Hail Mary, I decided to disable the immobilizer, just in case with the immobilizer off there's further self-tests that might carry on. I know, for example, some of these cars will only prime the fuel pump if the immobilizer is happy, but still nothing. We're still not getting our fault code showing up as needed on this original one. We know it's stuck on our other donor one, but this one isn't coming up with anything. So what we're gonna have to do is break out the big guns, and I'm going to try taking some chips off and see if we can force that fault on. So let's bring you into my chain of thought now on what I'm going to do. So this is our one with the faulty processor. This one has a hard 151 fault, and that extra bit of data underneath an input matches what we originally seen in this one, although this one isn't triggering the fault at the moment. So what I'm going to try and do is remove some of those extra chips. So this one has that quad injector driver chip at the back removed, and this one immediately comes up with the fault, and the code numbers, from what I can see, they seem very similar to the ones that we have originally on the one that we're dealing with at the moment. I'm going to try and remove one of these quad chips at the back and see then if this ECU can pick up that as a driver diagnose. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to remove this one on the back wall and see what codes come up. If it comes up with a different number, then we can probably presume that the code coming up is to do with which individual chip. That code that we've seen, can't quite remember the number, but it came up with a 2 out of it somewhere. That might have just been a general, we've got an issue with any driver. But if I remove this one on the back corner and check for the fault, I'm going to see, does this detect it? Does it come up with an internal driver diagnose code? And does it come up with the same kind of fault number in the extra details? Or does it come up with something else? So we've got that back quad power chip out. We've removed him out of the equation, and now let's see what will happen with our fault code. So switch the power on, we'll go back in, engine, 6-cylinder, MSS 50, and fault code read. Yes, there he is. Yeah. So and that doesn't really help us. So it has detected that, and that gives the same fault code if one of these driver chips is missing, but we have the same SPI 0 and IPK 2, so that doesn't change on the different chips, as our previous ECU had one of the injector ones at the back missing, and now we have a different one. I'm not sure what's on this one, but it is coming up with the same kind of code. So that particular code is not specific to each driver chip, which means unfortunately we're not going to be able to figure out from that, or at least from the original codes, which exact driver chip it had an issue with. And carrying on with the testing, I tried to clear that code and it wouldn't clear with the chip out. I put the chip back in, and now that fault for the internal driver has gone. So 100% it was detecting that chip. So I'm going to try removing some of these other driver chips. I'm going to go for, let's say we'll do these ignition ones next, and I'm going to remove one of those and then check and see if it has detected that, and see if one of those throws up a code. This one here looks to be the easiest one. We've got the most amount of working room around there. It is very close to this capacitor, so I'm going to remove this capacitor first, unsolder this chip, and then we'll check for fault codes. So now we have that ignition controller chip and the capacitor out, and we're going to see if the ECU can figure that out. So let's go again. We need to switch him on, read our faults, and we do have the same thing again. So again with this one, IPK fault code 2. So that means we get this same issue on pretty much any internal driver when it is removed. Still no joy. So what I've done is I've got the oscilloscope out now to check and see what some of these drivers are doing. So I have this one hooked onto our drivers, and that would be injector 4 and 5 that I'm connected onto now. And when we go onto oscilloscope, handily there's a little bias voltage on there, so each one of those, they're hanging around about 4.5 volts. But if I activate injector 4 and flick back, there are our pulses that's coming on injector 4. Activate injector 5, and there you'll see our red pulses, and that's coming injector 5. So we know those two outputs are working. Let's move on to some others. Everyone has come out to watch, and we should be on 1 and 6 now. So I'm going to trigger 1, 6, and there we go. Yep, so there are another couple ones that we know are working, and our final ones now are 2 and 3, and yep, they're pulsing fine. So all of the injectors are able and active, and they are pulsing and working. So let's move on to our ignition side. We are hooked in now on what would be the trigger pin out of these ones, and we're onto coils 1 and 3. Now input won't activate the coils, but good old tool 32 will, and we have these Stoyan Z1 and Z3. So we go control Z1, Z3, back to our oscilloscope, and there we go. That's our two traces. So we've seen the red ones. It looks like it can only do one at a time, I guess, as we had the red trace and then it switched on to the green. So we have 1 and 3 working. Let's move on to the others. Activate 2, activate 5, quickly over, and there we go. Well, there we got 1, so that's 5 in the green. There we go, activate 2, activate, and there we go on the other one. and the last two is 4 and 6. So activate 4, activate 6, quickly over, and there we can see our 2 traces as well. And that big messy trace is from the idle valve, so that's going to be running a lot higher frequency. If we can slow that down a little. Let's try again. We'll go for another activate so we can see it. There we are, Stoyan LL Stella, which is the idle valve controller. And there we can see stuff pulsing around. So that's the idle valve 1 working as well. Quick point on oscilloscopes. When you're measuring some of this stuff, you sometimes do need to be careful. Certainly injectors, because they have a coil in them, you can get an inductive pulse coming back in, and that can be spikes of up to 200 volts or more. So often you will need an attenuator in there just so it doesn't get sort of high over voltages popping back. That's all done because you energize a coil, which makes a magnetic field, and then when you shut that power down into the coil, the magnetic field collapses and produces a big spike then of power back. It's exactly the same way how you get the spark by energizing a coil and then letting the coil, letting the magnetic field collapse, which induces a current that produces the spark. The injectors can do something similar. So when you activate the solenoid injectors and you energize the coil, when you switch off that, you can get a pulse coming back, and that can fry stuff. In this case, I have nothing to worry about because I don't have any coils or any sort of inductors stuck on the end of this. But if you are doing this, remember, if you've got an oscilloscope, you could destroy it. Still nothing. So let's recap now from the start and see what we've gone through. So when it arrived, we had a fault code for internal driver diagnose. It's not a hard fault, it wasn't currently present, and when cleared it wouldn't come back. I've gone through with ISTA and tool 32 and we've triggered everything I can and the fault isn't coming back. We've also ruled out that the code is going to give us any helpful information, since we removed this chip and we had the same fault code, and we removed this chip down here and we got the same fault code. So we know that that fault code is generic for any driver inside having an issue. I've gone through these driver chips, everything that I can find. These ones are IGBT, so these are IGBTs that run the coils. These are the ones that run those. So there's kind of like a step. The processor tells this to activate a coil, that activates these big ones, and that's why these ones, they're not smart enough to give any feedback. These are the ones that are smart enough to give any feedback. So these are the ones that would pop up saying there's a driver fault. That's the reason why these ones here, they're not detected, as they're not diagnosed. These ones here are diagnosed, so these would come up with issues if they had them. Same with these two little ones in here. And I will show you, I suppose at the end, I will do a big graphic of where everything is and what all the different components are. But we have found that there are no clues to point us to which driver is playing up. I've tested every driver because often we have multiple. In fact, we have at least 2 of everything. We've got 3 of those big ones at the back, 2 of those Vanos ones over there, 2 of these little square ones that do some smaller stuff, 2 of those ones there that do the coils. I've compared all of those against each other, so I can't find any one where it's standing out against anything else, as in, you know, it doesn't have any weird readings compared to the one next to it. I've also checked against known good ones. I've checked diode between various legs. I've checked resistance on various things. So categorizing all of these, I can't find any one that stands out differently to anything else. And then the final check then was the multimeter, sorry, not the multimeter, the oscilloscope, which is kind of like a multimeter, to be honest. It is just a multimeter that displays stuff over time. Going through on that one to just check that this is able to activate stuff. So we did our various bits and pieces. We've checked all the injectors. are other bits and pieces in there. Some of them we couldn't do. There is a secondary air pump on the back of that first chip. That there, couldn't get that one to activate. This one over here has idle valve. It has possibly an electric fan. No, that's not an electric fan in that one. I can't remember what the end thing is. I'll show you that one at the end though. It also has, quite interestingly, an upshift light is built into one of those, and it does go out to a pin. I'm guessing that's to do with the SMG. These ones in here, these ones, they do minor stuff. So tends to be fuel pump, which I believe is working, and also various stuff out to the dashboard. TI for injection timing, TD for a pulse. So everything, as far as I can tell, is working out pretty well. And as I said earlier, here is the grand tour of the MSS50. So starting off with the brains of the operation, we have these two processors. Both of these, they are identical, but they get configured in master and slave. So one of them will be setting timings and rules, and the other one has to follow what the other one has decided. We have the crystal in the middle, which they both share. That's running at 4.1940 megahertz. And they also have their own separate flash memory. And we can also see here, this is a BDM port which goes direct into that processor, and there's one over here as well, and that will talk into this processor, and that's used for setting up the processor. You can even write in and out of these flash memories. So they each have their own flash memory, and the actual size of the processor is pretty small. They're only about that size in the middle, and we can show you that on thermal imaging. You can see how it's just heating up on the sort of a little inner square. Same thing you'll see on these flash memory chips. And the thing glowing at the back is our 5-volt regulator. That's taking the 12 volts in and dropping it down to 5 volts. So that can burn off a fair bit of heat. Heading over to the side, and in this corner, this tiny little chip here is the EEPROM. This is where the fault codes and adaptions are stored. So both ECUs, both processors, will write data to there, and any fault codes and so on will be logged inside of there. We have our 6 IGBTs, so they're very similar to MOSFETs. They work in the same kind of way, and these are the ones that fire our coils, and these two chips are the ones that control these MOSFETs, so, or IGBTs rather. So this processor will tell that chip, and that chip will then switch on the corresponding one for any particular coil to fire the coil. Heading up to the back edge, we have our Vanos controllers. That's the exhaust Vanos, and that's the intake Vanos. These will move the cams forward and back on each one. This will move the intake cam, this will move the exhaust cam. There's the 5-volt regulator, and these two chips here are the ones that control our injectors. We have injectors 1, 2 and 3, and the secondary air pump relay is on this chip, and this one does injectors 4, 5 and 6, and it does appear to be there's a spare output on that one that's not doing anything at all. There is another one of the same type on that back corner, and he does a tank ventilation valve is in there. There is an upshift signal, which I'm guessing is more related to the SMGs. I don't know what exactly that does, where it just sends a signal to the SMG gearbox, or whether it's something that's able to put on a shift light or anything like that. And then over here, the remaining two outputs on this are for the idle valve, forward and closed, to sort of open and close to control the idle speed. Going to some stuff in the middle. This is our CAN controller. So our CAN bus comes in off a couple of these pins. In fact, it might even be these two pins here on the top. Goes through this, I believe that's a choke or a filter, then into this little chip, and then this fella here, this is the main CAN controller, and that will pass things on then to the two processors. The main part of this is mainly going to be sending out information, I guess, to the gearbox and so on. We also have our lambda sensor controller. So this here is the one that takes in the signals from our lambda sensors, change them to whatever values needed and send them out to the processors. And then these two chips here, this one and this one, are our NOx sensor controllers. So these are the ones that monitor and amplify and I guess filter the NOx sensor signals, and will tell the ECU if it's knocking on any particular cylinder. And then we also have two other chips here, these LMOS chips. This one here does diagnostics, so all of your diagnostics comes in and out through this one. And this one here, same type of chip. This one does EWS, and that's the immobilizer signal. So that would come in through that one, although technically it is sort of bidirectional. It could in fact output details if it wanted to. And then finally we have these couple of square driver chips here at the back. So this one does our electric fan and our lambda sensor heater. It also does the fuel pump and the aircon. So this one carries a lot of, or at least it activates a lot of smaller auxiliary functions. The majority of these things are going to be a relay that it's triggering, so it doesn't need to be a big chip like this one here, for example, that was doing our injectors. They were going out direct to the injectors. Same with the coils, they were direct to the coils. These ones here, they just tend to trigger relays. And then this one here, this one's pretty much just concerned with the dashboard. So we have a TI signal, which is fuel injection, and that is sent to the dashboard, and that's what it uses to calculate the MPG display. It looks at the distance you're traveling from the road speed, the speed of the engine, and the TI, which is the amount of fuel that's being put in. So that's just a general injection time. We have TD, which is a pulse for revolution, and that comes out of this particular chip. And finally, the malfunction indicator lamp, the check engine light, comes on in this one. That's not used on the majority of European ones, as we don't have the check engine light, but I guess it is something that could be activated for some various markets. So, commiseration coffee, and that's going to be it. In fact, there's a big meeting going on over there. Hopefully they're going to come up with some ideas. No, they're discussing what bar to go to afterwards. Right, that's no good. So this, unfortunately, difficulty level extreme. So it's not able to go any further and figure out what the problem is. Whatever it is, it's not happening right now, and everything I can test is coming up absolutely fine. So I'm going to have to clean this up, send it back to the customer, and that's it. That is something that will happen every now and again. So I've often explained this as, if you're repairing laptops and phones, you have everything there, but this is only one component of the entire system. There's no engine in this, so you can't tell what this is going to do when it's outside. To get it to be fully active, you would need to be then feeding it with cam and crank signals and other various bits and pieces, and then it would start doing something. But at the moment, we've only got some bits and pieces, and we have managed to go through and activate and test a lot. We've done as much as we can, but there is no more, and that's it. This is over for this particular video. That's as much as we can do. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you've learned a little bit out of this on how you go around diagnosing some of this stuff, and at least the general stuff you can do, the general mindset of things to check. But don't be disheartened, as not everything comes out with a winner at the end. Like and subscribe, and all I can do now is hope for a miracle when it's sent back in the post.